This is the Sacred Podcast. I am Hindol Gupta. This is a unique experiment even for me. I got hold of my very old friend Neha Bhatnagar, who lives in Australia and is very popular as a yoga practitioner, a healer, and has done lots of work in this field. I convinced her to do this podcast with me, talking about all the things we really enjoy, which is how to get a little bit of sacred in our life. Neha, hello.
Hi there, Hindol. Thanks for the introduction. I'm so excited to do this with you. We were just discussing, I think probably one of the main reasons we would want to do something like this short but kind of deep explorations of timeless truths from India's spiritual skyscrapers or spiritual giants. Because why reinvent the wheel when we can probably learn a single timeless truth that can raise our vibes? What do you think, Hindol?
That's right. And every episode, and that's at least our effort, and you, the audience, will tell us whether we succeed or not. In every episode, we will talk about essentially characters, places, themes from India's sacred traditions that we really enjoy, that inspire us, enthuse us, that we have spent, Neha and I know each other for more than 15 years now, we have spent talking about between ourselves. And now we want to share all that with you. We are not claiming that we are the final word or we are the expert in this, but we certainly want to convey a certain enthusiasm, a certain joy that we have felt discussing all these things, which we now want to share with you.
That's absolutely right, Hindol. Thanks for clarifying that. Just here, as fellow compatriots, fellow travelers in this journey of life, learning from each other, learning from our great masters that have walked our hallowed lands, and wanting to share some of those uh, hidden wisdoms, timeless truths with the rest of you. So, thanks so much for being here today.
And today we wanted to begin with something that we both really like and enjoy, and something that I chanced upon, and I called Neha and said, "Look, I read this amazing thing, and because you come from partly a Marathi heritage, why don't you tell me a little more about it?" And we started discussing this. Let me read the English version to you as we get into the story, and then we will go into a little journey with you. The English version, and this is really a bit of a poem, says the ant flies into the sky, she swallows the sun, another miracle. A barren woman begets a son, a scorpion burrows down to the nether realms, and Shesha, the snake king, bows his head at its feet. A fly gives birth to a hawk. Muktabai sees all. Muktabai laughs. This, from Maharashtra, is an abhang by the great Saint Muktabai. I don't know how to say this in Marathi, but Neha does.
That's right, Hindol. And before we get deeper into Muktabai Hindol, just a quick question. Where are you taking us to? What century is this? What era is this? Could you give some context into Muktabai?
So she's, of course, this incredible 13th century child saint. She's part of this wonderful tradition of worshipping Lord Vitthal, in Pandharpur in Maharashtra. And this Vitthal tradition is also known as the Varkari tradition. I hope I'm pronouncing everything correctly. And there are these incredible songs, and the whole Tukaram and all these great saints who wrote incredible poetry and songs, all devoted to Vitthal, which is an avatar of Sri Vishnu.
That's right, yes. And she was one of the foremost bhakti saints, women bhakti saints in India. There are some other illuminaries in that field. But what makes Muktabai extremely special is her age. She was just 4 when her parents left this world, and she was 9 when she initiated some great sages under her tutelage. And she took Samadhi around the age of 18. So, in just such a short span of life, she was one of the most profound women bhakti saints in India. And as Hindol said, the Varkari tradition, she was kind of instrumental in getting people initiated, which was quite unknown for women in that time, to not only be so elevated, but also initiate others into this Varkari tradition, which today you see as the Pandharpur Vari, where millions of devotees sing uh, praises of the Lord, and they travel hundreds of kilometers to Pandharpur every year. A great sea of equality, everyone coming together. And so Muktabai was very instrumental, along with her brother Sant Dnyaneshwar and also Sant Tukaram, in initiating this tradition. So happy to be speaking about Muktabai Hindol. I'm curious, what is the lens, Hindol, that we're looking at her teachings today, uh, and her stories, the anecdotes through?
I think this, of course, the whole Muktabai tradition, and of course, we'll talk a little bit about her family too. But this is all part of the broader sort of Vaishnavite, in a sense, edifice or framework around India. The worship of Sri Vishnu and Lord Krishna, and of course, Lord Vitthal, and down south, of course, Lord Balaji. This is this whole sort of Vaishnavite tradition that links. And one of the great things I always say, I tell my students also, look, I mean, this is the interesting thing. People have always tried to divide India by saying, oh, we call it Vitthal and we call it Shri Krishna and we call it Srinathji and we call it Balaji and so on and so forth. But that's so surface level. If you just delve even a little deeper, you will realize that this sacred geography, whether it's Srinathji or whether it's Vrindavan or whether it's the Chaitanya tradition in Bengal or whether it's Shri Balaji, whether it's Lord Vitthal, they're all connected in India's sacred geography, sprinkled across India's sacred geography. These great pilgrimage centers, these great temples, and these great traditions that actually define, in a sense, the landscape of India, the sacred geography of India, and why, through the footsteps of pilgrims, so to speak, India, in a sense, is defined, its nationhood is defined far more than the political sense in which a nation is defined. But Neha, you must tell us how to say this wonderful Abhang in Marathi, and tell us a little bit about the wonderful familial tradition, the great family that Muktabai was part of. She was not the only sage in that family.
So Muktabai was born to very pious parents, a Brahmin family in Apegao in Maharashtra, and she was the youngest of four siblings. The first was actually their guru, Nivritinath. Then there was Sant Dnyaneshwar, who became Sant Dnyaneshwar later. Then there was Sopan, and then there was Muktai. And the parents were, just to cut a long story short, the parents were very pious, but the father had left the family home to become a sannyasi, even though he was married. And his teacher had sent him back many years later when he realized he was married and had a wife. And later they bore kids. But the very fact that he had left the ashrama at which he was in, uh, the society didn't accept him. So the family was shunned, they were outcasts, and they lived in abject poverty. And the parents thought that if they were told by the head priests of the village that if they give up their lives and do paschatapa, or atone for their sin, so to speak, then their children will have a better life and will be accepted. The parents did that, leaving Muktai when she was only 4 years old. But that was not to be. If anything, they were treated even worse than before. And in that, through that difficult circumstances, did this family grow spiritually and also, of course, in age. And it's interesting. The father was so pious, I sometimes feel that the naming of the children is very apt. It kind of shows the lens through which they were seeing the world. So the first is Nivritinath, right? So if you go beyond these mortal wants, you reach the stage of Nivriti, where you go beyond that and you become knowledgeable, you get wisdom, jnana, jnaneshwara. The bridge from that wisdom to moksha, the bridge sopan, which is the third sibling's name, is mukta, or liberation. So that's the fertile ground of spirituality in which Muktai was raised, even though her parents left, because her eldest was given the Diksha into the Nath tradition, and he initiated the younger siblings then. And so Muktai was raised with this deep devotion to the Lord, but also deep wisdom or the Jnana Marg through her parents and her brother.
And of course, her brother is the great, one of the great saints of Maharashtra. One of the brothers, actually all of the siblings, as you were saying, but also especially Naneshwar. I mean, an incredible figure who wrote incredibly and beautifully about the principles of enlightenment in Hindu philosophy. Several verses of the Bhagavad Gita, his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita and several verses from there, extremely popular even today. And so he's an incredible figure. I remember, Neha, you had sent me this absolutely beautiful rendition of one of the verses of the Bhagavad Gita, turned into commentary by Naneshwar, Sant Dnyaneshwar, sung by the great Kishori Amonkar, which is
That's right.
absolutely incredible. I mean, it was just mind blowing. But I also noticed, Neha, that, holding on to your Marathi heritage, you're not giving us the translation, keeping it right till the end so that it
I
becomes
will.
a little flourish at the end and you can show off
That's
your
right.
language skills.
That's right, Indul. I'm going to do a little bit of non-spiritual ahamkara at the end of showing off the Marathi. But you mentioned the Kishori Amonkar piece, and it's very interesting, Indul. That was actually sung on, I think, the next day of Indira Gandhi's assassination on live on AIR FM. And why was that picked? Because it is from Jnaneshwari, which is, like you said, an interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita by Sant Dnyaneshwar, and it speaks the timeless truths of who we really are. So, at a time when the nation was grieving, she was singing about the timelessness that is the human, the Atman, and not this human body which is time bound. And so I think that brought a lot of solace. So yes, these were powerful verses, and there is a very powerful Abhang Tati Ugra Jnaneshwara, which is a very famous series of paragraphs that Muktabai sang to her brother Sant Dnyaneshwara when dejected by society. They had constantly had to face tests and rejection. And one day, even of course, he was a young boy, but of course, he was also, they say, an avatara of Krishna. And so, but even he was really dejected that day. And he shut the door, and he refused to open the door of their little kutir where they were staying. And this little girl on the other side is saying, Tati Ugra, open the door, brother, just open the door. And if we look at this Hindol, I think we can transition into the part where we talk about this wisdom, the eye of singularity, that Muktai brings into these paragraphs. And that pretty much forms the crux of a lot of her teachings and a lot of the anecdotes that we'll also visit. And this unity consciousness in Dole, it would be amazing if you can tell us a bit more about what is it? Like, what is it in our spiritual traditions and what does it really mean?
It's so beautiful. I did not know that this recording of Kishori Amonkarji was played after Indira Gandhi was assassinated on All India Radio. That's really incredible. And here you can see how a society, in a sense, culturally is responding to what clearly would have been and is a nationwide moment of grief when a great prime minister was brutally murdered. Now, this and the connection immediately going to its spiritual heritage, its spiritual tradition, and society is seeking solace in that spirituality. It's so interesting that you say this because I have been thinking. Robert Kennedy Jr. in the United States recently said that one of the problems that the U.S. faces is really a problem of spirituality, much more than materialism. Of course, it has this drug problem and this opioid problem and this fentanyl problem and all kinds of things, immigration, this, that, and the other, government and debt and so on and so forth. But deeper than all of this is a fundamental spiritual problem. And I've been reading these essays written by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and in one of those essays, Tilak talks about what Western education, what British education took away from us, and he says, look, I mean, at the end of the day, Indian education system, for good or for bad, was always connected to this idea of spiritual teaching, that whatever you learn, whatever you do, has a spiritual underpinning. When you broke that, when you took that away, in a sense, society became moreless and rudderless. And therefore, the fundamentals got really shaken. And this is, of course, an old criticism, of enlightenment and enlightenment's promises, that at the end of the day, people became rootless and rudderless from their traditions and any spiritual sense of self. And I really think today, in a sense, that spiritual sense of self is coming back into India. Sometimes there are excesses, I would not deny that, but certainly at a deeper level, especially among young people, there is definitely a reawakening, a resurgence. You saw the millions that came, for instance, at the Mahakumbh Mela in Prayagraj. And I think Muktabai is an incredible, you said, the sense of unity, right? And this in the, I mean, all of them actually are in a sense connected to the whole Advaita Vedanta principles also, right? I mean, because they are talking about this entire idea that there is an individual self, an individual soul, and there is a deeper divine consciousness, there is a broader divine consciousness, and how do we find the bridge between these two things? And of course, in the Vaishnavite tradition, they would say the Brahman is only the beginning. Then there is the Paramatma, and then there is Bhagavan. So you first realize the Brahman, the unity of your personal soul with the universal consciousness. Then you realize that there is an even higher power, and then you come to the supreme sort of face of the Godhead, so to speak, the face of the Lord. And that's Bhagavan, right? But and these are also obviously spiritual details. But at the heart of it all is this idea which I find very beautiful, which is so beautiful in this child saint Muktabai, because she's after all just a child. And in the Abhang that you mentioned, where she's urging her brother to come out of the door, that coming out, that act of coming out is not merely leaving a room, of course, as you were saying, it is
That's
also
right.
freeing your mind and coming out of the four walls that we shackle our mind also in, right? And seeing a wider, greater consciousness. Now, all of this, one of the great tragedies is all of this today, many people think is esoteric, but these are the fundamental ideas that our education would teach us. And now, this doesn't mean everybody will become a saint, but at least there is some understanding that there are deeper realities than just materialism and just consumption.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful, Hindu. That's a very powerful point that you said that uh, why is it relevant today, for us? And there is more than meets the eye has always been a part of all of Indian education and the basis which it was based on. And when you said it's not literally a physical room, but opening the doors of consciousness. So, what are we allowing in to our consciousness on a daily basis? When she says Tati Ugra Dnyaneshwara, she's saying that the doors open. You are the one who has taught me that don't see people as different individuals. And I made it I just looked down just to tell you a few quick pointers in those I think which are very important in how she's seeing this and interpreting it. And I think one of them that really stands out for me is when she says that, you know, um, the Samadrishti, see everyone through that eye of unity because it is God actually in every single person. And a sage doesn't see a relative or a stranger and makes differentiations between them, but tries to see that God, that doership in each and every one of them. And there's this profound understanding at such a young age. People say she was Adi Shakti, she was more the mother goddess. So, of course, age is just one way of looking at it, but she was timeless. And she's telling us these timeless truths through this Abhang by saying that um, instead of blame, condemnation, let's look at the one source doership. As there's There's no sort of um, uh, the power of two, let's drop that. It's not me versus the other, it's me and the other. And at times it is tough, of course, but she gives an analogy of, let's say you bite your tongue. Would you break the teeth that bit the tongue? Or let's say, you scratch your hand. Would you break the other hand that has scratched one hand? No, you wouldn't, right? So the same way, we have to have that sort of samadrishti, that equality of vision in seeing others. And it is not them, their conditioning that is making them do this. And nothing can happen in life until it is the will of God. So let's wake up from this sort of dream and recognize this unity in each and every one. And even Hindol, when we see this, quickly, if I could just tell those two very famous stories, and connect it to how the same, unity consciousness that she's seeing. And one of them is just, that look, all of this is out there on the internet. So if you want to read deeper into names and dates, but the point of this is just to share and connect some of the anecdotes with these, with her teachings. And I'll just, that's why I'll make it very quick. But there's this 1400-year-old saint, very powerful. He's got all possible tricks up his sleeve, all the siddhis possible that he can demonstrate and get praise from so many thousands of followers that he has. But she even to him, she addresses and says, Bala, like my little child, drop this, go within. We don't have to necessarily display this, show and form to try to differentiate ourselves because you're no different. You're the same person as this other person, and just your inner strength is enough to show that divinity. So you don't have to do all of this. Then the very famous Sant Namdev, who became the famous Sant Namdev later, he was very pious. Everyone knew him as a very big devotee of Vithala, and even the brothers bowed to him in Pandharpur, but she didn't bow to him. And he was obviously affronted, like, why is this little girl not bowing to me? Does she not know who I am? And she asked this potter, this Gaur Kumbar, that how do you know if a pot is fully baked? He said, when you hit it with a stick, it should not, make any sound. Then you know it's baked. So she's like, okay, why don't you hit all of us? And then he hits the brothers, nothing. But when he hits Sant Namdev, he sees what is happening, what is all this? And the potter declares him half baked. And he runs to Lord Vittala, who then guides him to one very senior monk who was also uh, a disciple of Muktabai, Visoba Chati. And he goes to him, and then Visoba Chati tells him that you're only seeing the God in Vittala, you're not seeing it in everyone. So she is trying to tell you to see that same divinity in everyone, which is why she thought you were half baked. So he takes him in, and then he later becomes Sant Namdev and famous bhakti poet as we now know him. So she's always through her teachings trying to see this one divinity in all of the people who become her disciples and who even come to sort of get inspired from her.
What an incredible story. I just love these stories that you've just told us because they connect so beautifully and so seamlessly to the world that these saints were part of. There's a potter, there's a pot. You can almost imagine this entire scene play out before your eyes. There's the great temple of Pandharpur, there's the worship of Lord Vittal, and these village people really, and their very simple but very profound understanding of philosophy, of spirituality, and their very pious, very deep devotion, and yet their ability to translate and explain this very profound spirituality that they possess in such simple, easy to understand terms. I just find it absolutely incredible. And of course, the other thing that we must say, the Gorakhnath tradition, the Nath tradition that these all of these people belonged to, of course, lives on even today. In Gorakhpur, there is the great temple, and but there is a chief minister in the Indian state, the biggest Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, who himself comes from this Nath tradition of Nath yogis. And this tradition continues even today. And there again you see this unbroken thing about Indian civilization, right? We're talking about 13th century people, living a particular kind of spiritual life, and it's unbroken. It's continued, into the 21st century as an unbroken tradition, and you can really go see the same tradition, the same practices, the same devotion even today, which I find absolutely incredible. And that's in a sense why we're also talking about this, because it's such a alive tradition, because this sacred element is so alive in our lives.
That's right. Hindul, but I have a question here because, yes, of course, there was this famous word of this teacher called Ramesh Balsekar. He says, living the life courageous. This is that living the life courageous because it's not easy to recognize that the same electricity that is running in the fan is running in the air conditioning, is running in the cooler, but they all have different purposes, but it's the same current. This teacher, Gautam Sachdeva, teaches this principle of Advaita Vedanta all the time, and he mentions all of these examples, and I absolutely enjoy listening to it. But when it comes to practice in real life, which is what this is our kshetra, dharma kshetra, kurukshetra, as they say in the Bhagavad Gita. This is our field of dharma, our very life, our very body. It's all very well to recognize this current when it comes to electrical appliances, and the saints to do it because, well, who knows, lifetimes of sadhana that they did had ripened them to be able to see this. How would you and I apply this in our daily life? If someone really ticks us off or takes off on another tangent, falsely blames us, condemns us, I know for a second it's helpful to know this. So there's definitely merit to reading these things, hearing these things, because at least for a fraction of a second that will come to your mind that it's not me, God is doing this. It's not them, it's their conditioning through God that's running. But then what, right? Is it possible to sustain this, you think?
So, like everything else, right? I mean, maybe there is great merit to this common spiritual tradition across many paths and many different sects and many different even religious traditions. That practice is important, right? I mean, the Buddhist, for instance, and I'm thinking about that at the moment. you know, once you do 10,000 hours of meditation, your mind works in a different way. And this is not just something that we're talking in terms of, soulful spiritualism and so on and so forth, but genuinely the waves in your brain, your very brain, the neurotransmission in your brain works differently. And this is now true. Of course, it's true for Buddhist monks. It's true for Hindu monks who spend hours and hours meditating, and days and months and years meditating. So once you do those 10,000, 100,000 hours of meditation, it definitely changes you. And even devotion, right? I mean, of course, some people may not be touched by it, but I dare say that if you were to diligently every single day go before a deity, offer them yourself, so to speak, and your devotion, and you do a ritual and you do an arti and a puja, you may be doing a homa, like, Neha, you do beautiful homas even in your home in Australia, and you do that day after day. Now, maybe in 1 week nothing will change, maybe in 1 year or 1 month nothing will change, or maybe in several years nothing will change. But if you consistently do it day after day, week after week, I dare say something will change within you. There will be a certain transformation where you will be able to see that, in a sense, life is broader than what we make it to be. The small dimensions, almost like the narrow Freudian dimensions of life can fall away. This human beings, are born and they sort of, acquire material things. They and they sort of covet all kinds of things, and they die. This sort of three pronged existence can have higher dimensions and deeper dimensions if you build that ritual or that practice. Now, you may want to call it practice, you may want to call it ritual, and it could be all kinds of things, right? I mean, we mentioned a bunch of things. Some Vaishnavite traditions would tell you it is essentially chanting the name of Hari, right? Srila Prabhupada, who founded the ISKCON movement of Krishna consciousness, essentially said that in the Kali Yuga, the Lord appears in different yugas or yugs, in different forms. And in the Kali Yuga, the Lord appears as the Nama Japa. The Lord is in the name, in his name, because in the Kali Yuga, human beings are terribly materially motivated. So the Lord realizes that they may not even, sit and meditate upon him, and so on and so forth. So at least you chant the name. The more you chant the name of the Lord, the Lord is on your tongue, so to speak. The divine sort of enters your soul through the chanting of the holy name. Now, again, if you may say, oh, but I did a chant once or twice or 10 times, now, so what? But if you do it again and again, like the great monks of the Vaishnavite tradition, and you do 16 rounds as is prescribed, or 32 rounds every day, day after day, month after month, I dare say something will change. You will, something will transform inside you. Like they say, if you hear the name of Ram again and again, right? You may be wanting to, utter an abuse, but even in that abuse, you will hear the name of Ram, right? Because it is so pervasive in your entire existence. And that's a way of saying that in everything you do, it will get infused by this spiritual practice. And a very small example of this is, a lot of monks will tell you it's not like monks don't get angry. It's just that they respond differently when the stimulus of anger appears in their life. You and I may, respond differently, and they respond in a very different way. And it's because of their practice that they're able to respond in a more compassionate, in a more thoughtful way.
That's right. So it comes down to practice, abhyasa. That's interesting. And for some of us who are thinking, gosh, 10,000 hours to change my brain waves. An interesting study, the other day that I read was out of Harvard, where I think the neuroscientist name is Sarah Lazar. She showed that in as little as 27 minutes, a day, let's say over a period of 8 weeks, we're able to change the physiology. So, for example, the amygdala, which is the fear center, shrinks, or the gray matter in our prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for planning and creativity, etc., expands. And so, like you were saying, I just thought I'd mention that for some of us who might feel daunted with this notion of practice could take so long, but even just a dedicated 20, 25 minutes a day of something, like you said, Nama Japa or meditation or any of these tools that we have uh, to, to, to change the way we respond versus react to the world. I think that's helpful, and practice is definitely a keystone for it. Thanks for sharing that. It's just making me think that, yeah, constant remembrance then of this unity consciousness, or eye of singularity, just one learning from Muktabai, if we could apply on a daily basis. And I'm thinking maybe starting tomorrow, I could, whoever I look at, see that if a particular Ishta Devta that I like, a particular deity, so for someone who doesn't necessarily believe in deities, something in the universe that they like, a particular tree that they love, or a bird or an animal, we could just look at that person and imagine that in them. And then anyone else who's walking down the road, if we could just see multiples of that dear image. What do you think? Is that you think that's
No,
a practice that I
that's
could
a
probably
beautiful
try?
idea. As long as, of course, Bengalis like me don't land up thinking about food every time they, look at anything in the world. I mean, that would be helpful. At least for me personally.
Right.
But no, I mean, I think, and I was actually going to say to you in all seriousness, I mean, I've known for all the years that you have done your practice, whether it's puja, whether it's homa, you're saying, people are scared of 10,000 hours. If you were to genuinely calculate, someone like you may have already
Right.
done 10,000 hours,
Mm.
interestingly, like I have probably already done, you know, I don't know how many thousand, but several thousand hours of either chanting or meditation. I mean, sometimes we get intimidated when we suddenly see this figure in front of us.
Yeah.
But, daily practice, if you build it in your routine, almost like exercise or something else,
Yeah.
over a period of time, you just see that period of, that it's just gone by, and, you've just, it has become integrated into your routine. And it will have transformative impact, like you're saying, even as small a time as 27 minutes a day of regular practice really has transformative impact. I at least have found, I had, as you know, when my father was very, very unwell, I used to listen to this one chant of Ramana Maharishi,
Mm.
from the great sage Ramana Maharishi from the Arunachala ashram of Ramana Maharishi. And it's nothing, it just says Arunachala Shiva again and again and again. And, it's just incredible. I mean, it just gave me so much confidence, so
Oh,
much support and strength.
is it that one? Arunachala,
Chala Shiva.
Arunachala,
That's right.
Layani. Oh, that's a beautiful one.
And it just goes on and it's very sonorous. It just keeps on saying Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva. And it goes on and on. Of course, I'm doing a very bad job of like singing it. But it's absolutely, and we're gonna actually give some of these references to music in our little notes when wherever you listen to this or watch this, we're gonna put it all in our notes so that you also can access some things that we access and benefit from it. And one of the maybe the last things, and perhaps this is where we can sort of, now that we've spoken about such beautiful music, wrap up our conversation. One of the great things about Muktabai, I feel, is really incredible, is that, and we must never forget this, that she's really a child, at least in the human sort of sense, right? I mean, she's really a child. So this idea that, oh, you come to great spiritual wisdom at a particular age is completely, at least from the Indian tradition, not true at all. She is really a child, and yet she's so profound and so incredible. And Neha, now at least perhaps you will give us your little, sense of your Marathi self, which I'm sure would at least make all your relatives happy.
That's true. Please pardon any mispronunciation. मुंगी उडाली आकाशी, तिने गिळले सूर्याशी, थोर नवलाव झाला, वांजे पुत्र प्रसवला. विंचू पाताळाशी जाये, शेष माथान वंदी पाये. माशी व्याली, घार झाली, देखुणी मुक्ताई हासली.
There you are. Muktabai sees it all. Muktabai sees everything, and Muktabai laughs. Muktabai smiles, because Muktabai, of course, understands the underlying truth beyond all this activity that's going on frantically in the world. I've had a wonderful time talking to you, Neha, about this, and I'm sure this is a journey for the beginning of a journey for both you and me in really sharing all the things that we have discussed over many, many years with our friends. Really, everybody who listens to us is our extended family of friends. If we can encourage you in some senses to delve into some of the things that we have found in our journey, it'll be incredible.
That's right. Just a little bit of the sacred in our lives every week in Dole. So excited to share this journey with you as well. Thank you so much all for listening. Namaste.
Namaste.